Warfare is modern again. We thought it was modern back in 2007, but this time it's really modern, as Infinity Ward's latest shooter reboots the Call of Duty series and retells an old story with a new approach. Also, new graphics, and an engine that looks great while running surprisingly well on even budget PCs. Modern Warfare surprisingly doesn't fare well on AMD's Ryzen processors and has some issues with high core count CPUs, but we'll get to that. First, let's jump into the settings, which include support for multiple resolutions and aspect ratios and allow you to change the FOV. Call of Duty Modern Warfare supports ray tracing, which runs well on RTX hardware, but will really push the limits for GTX cards. It's about a 30% performance hit on RTX cards, but we'd suggest leaving ray tracing disabled. In our testing, it was hard to notice a difference in shadows or lighting. There are no graphics presets here, just 16 individual options to play with, and most have little impact on performance. Unless you have a low-end card and need to make every bit of VRAM count, you'll likely be able to play with most of these settings at maximum. To test Modern Warfare's performance, we used a fairly demanding section of the first campaign mission and ran it at minimum and maximum settings across 25 graphics cards and a range of CPUs and laptops. Thanks to MSI again for providing us with the hardware for this testing. At 1080p minimum, Modern Warfare is barely recognisable. Textures are flat, blocky, and ugly. On the bright side, it'll run this way on every single graphics card we tested, and even the GTX 1050 averaged at 60 FPS. Meanwhile, mid-range and high-end cards average at least 144 FPS, with the RTX 2080 Ti getting a ridiculous 270 frames per second. Unless you're running on really limited hardware, we suggest cranking up everything to max settings, where Modern Warfare looks beautiful by comparison. With settings maxed out, the story largely remains the same. All cards take about a 25% dip in performance, and none really change position here, showing we're really only GPU limited even with the GTX 2080 Ti. Our i7-8700 isn't bottlenecking performance at all. Even an old GTX 970 can average 60 FPS here, so 1080p max on a budget card is easily attainable. Unfortunately, AMD's 4GB cards failed to run, so they're excluded from these results. Tick on ray tracing, and even the RTX 2060 stays above a minimum frame rate of 60 FPS. The GTX 1660 does surprisingly well, but old generation cards suffer badly. A GTX 1080 Ti really can't handle it, dropping minimums into the 30 FPS range. Unless you have headroom to spare on a high-end RTX card, our suggestion is not to bother with DXR. The culling begins when we up the resolution to 1440p. Anything short of an RX 580 drops below the 60 FPS mark, and only cards above the 2060 Super manage to stay above 100 FPS. For single player, a budget card might be fine, if you don't mind some drops into the 30-40 FPS range, but for competitive multiplayer, it's not going to cut it. Stick to cards like the 1070 to keep the frame rate high and input lag low. Your kill-death ratio will thank you for it. At 1440p, we found that not even a 2080 Super could quite reach the 144 FPS, with minimums down to around the 110 mark. Pair that with the G-Sync monitor though, and it's still going to look silky smooth. Modern Warfare is surprisingly forgiving at maxed out 4K, which should be a welcome surprise to all you 4K monitor owners out there. Everything from the RTX 2070 and up can hit the coveted 60 FPS. Even the GTX 1080 Ti is right on the threshold, just barely outperforming AMD's Radeon 7 and RX 5700's XT. All three cards average over 60 FPS at 4K, but dip into the mid-50s in our testing. Still, not bad at all. While good 4K performance starts around $500, there are a lot of cards to choose from that can do the job. Now for the elephant in the room. In our testing, Ryzen CPUs took a huge performance hit in Modern Warfare. The Ryzen 5 3600 and Ryzen 9 3900X fall well behind their usual Intel rivals, with older CPUs faring even worse. In 1080p min and max, the two Ryzen 3000 series chips we tested fall 30 frames below the i5-8400. Intel CPUs perform predictably in order, with the overclock on our i7-8700K barely making any difference versus stock. Only the 4-core and 4-thread i3-8100 really falls off the pace here. Things do change a bit around the 1440p and 4K, but that simply seems to indicate that Modern Warfare doesn't know what to do with hyperthreading or SMT, which might explain the Ryzen results. It's not that you can't play the game with a Ryzen CPU, but performance is lower than expected. The good news is that even an Intel Core i3 CPU can get the job done. Since performance for Modern Warfare has been strong across the board, outside its issues with AMD CPUs, there's no big surprise here. Laptop cards can't keep up with desktops, but the RTX 2060 and 2070 Max-Q models each deliver an average of 90 FPS at 1080p max. Any RTX 2070 or 2080 model is going to crush it here, hitting frames of more than 144 FPS with ease. They even do surprisingly well with ray tracing enabled, although expect minimum frame rates to drop below 60 FPS. Modern Warfare's issues with Ryzen CPUs and some low-spec graphics cards with 4GB of VRAM are disappointing, but if your PC doesn't run afoul of those issues, you can expect smooth performance all the way up to 4K with an appropriate card. Individual graphics settings have little impact, so dial them up and enjoy multiplayer, at least until you run into the 5th Claymore in a multiplayer match and decide it's time to go for a walk. Ah, there's the Call of Duty you remember.